Jesus is at it again. Luke's Gospel, chapter 17. Jesus is on the road and called into service in a rather remarkable way. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Thanks be to God for this holy word. I invite us to pray. God of great illumination and understanding, we first of all give thanks for the reading, the hearing of this sacred text from Luke. It's a rather strange story. Most of us aren't accustomed to encountering radical healings like that, and certainly not lepers. So perhaps the inclination within us is to sort of discount it or ignore it. But we know also that your sacred texts carry a message for each one of us. And in this one, it seems to be about reaching beyond the barriers that exist and establishing a relationship. So help us in the very ordinary ways of our living in the coming days to be like both Jesus and the lepers and reaching out in love. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Well, this Columbus Day weekend is hardly a major holiday in the U.S. I don't think. I mean, maybe more so for some than others, but you don't usually hear people saying, "Only 13 shopping days until Columbus Day."
Thank God.
That's right. But the day, in a funny way, in a very modest way, the day does mark the kind of an unofficial start of the holiday season. We'll ignore the fact that Walmart and Wegmans started their holiday season in July. And of course, if you happen to have Canadian roots or Canadian relatives, then this weekend, this Thanksgiving weekend, is a big deal. And in fact, there may be a lot of traffic at our northern border, more than usual. So on this weekend, when our neighbors across the border to the north give thanks, it's in a way timely that today's passage is all about borders and Thanksgiving, as we hear the account of Jesus and the lepers. Right from the outset, Jesus is crossing the border between Samaria and Galilee. And this wasn't like driving over the Peace Bridge either. Jesus was traversing an area steeped in animosity and distrust. Samaritans were persona non grata in the eyes of the Jews and vice versa. Not quite terrorists, but far from friends. So Jesus took some risk in even passing through this border region. Borders can be dangerous, but they can also be just plain confusing. Here's a case in point. Say you want to drive from South Bend, Indiana to Gary, Indiana. It's only about an hour's drive. But the odd thing about crossing this little corner of the state is that you can arrive in Gary, Indiana at approximately the same time you left South Bend, because the central time zone cuts down in between the two cities. And there are regions of this country where you can lose a whole lot more than an hour, too. We're heading down to Dundee today. When you go down to Dundee, with all those Mennonite farms down there, it can begin to resemble America 150 years ago, with the buggies. Another border region, where folks don't always understand one another or necessarily trust each other. We English. Jesus was in a border region of troubling diversity. And he didn't have the luxury of rolling up his electric windows and locking the doors until he drove through it either. He's immediately called out to serve. Called by 10 folks who really had no right calling anyone. The social convention of the day required that lepers call out only to keep people at a safe distance, not to bring them near. And I have to wonder what kind of courage it took that enabled them to ask for help. It was a brave and arguably foolish act on their part. Reaching past entrenched borders sometimes is. You can imagine somebody talking to the lepers this way. What, are you crazy asking for help? Better to shut up and save what little skin you got left. So it kind of begs the question, what did they know about this guy? This man, Jesus? What could possibly prompt them to make such an outburst, this voiceless band of social outcasts? Keeping in mind that leprosy, like many afflictions of the day, was considered a divine curse due to some sort of failing or flaw in the sufferer. So in that way, these 10 were less like poor children in Syria that we see on TV, and much more like inmates on death row. But to their credit, they were calling. It's amazing what Jesus can overlook when we ask for help. Jesus and the lepers were both crossing borders at their peril. The lepers courting disaster for not knowing their place, and Jesus getting into hot water for associating with sinners. But it didn't matter. God doesn't seem to care a whit about the walls we erect between ourselves. The Spirit crosses through these like smoke through a screen door. And it makes me think a little bit about those people in my life who have been courageous in that way, who've paid little heed to barriers, those folks who reach right past them in order to listen, in order to care, to help even those that are different. And I'm embarrassed by my reluctance, to be honest with you, and I'm inspired by their courage. But I also think it's often been folks who have been a leper, who've been on the outside, that are willing to dismantle the walls and to reach out, to reach over, and risk caring. Sadly, I'm marking an anniversary this year, but I lost my dear friend Mark 20 years ago. I miss Mark, in part because he had a wonderful, gentle way of reaching past barriers, all kinds of barriers. And this is a guy that couldn't reach across the table and pick up a glass of milk because of muscular dystrophy. But maybe because he knew what it was like to be on the outside, he tried very hard to bring anyone he met inside, into a circle of caring and friendship. And Mark's reach extended beyond his immediate friends, too, it turned out. At a time when the Americans with Disabilities Act was just about brand new, only a couple years old, Mark was being consulted by the U of R to see how this new law could be implemented on that campus in concrete ways, sometimes literally concrete ways, as they asked him about accessibility in the wheelchair. So in a very real sense, Mark helped the University of Rochester bring those who are outside in. And I guess I mentioned Mark because I think we've probably all been blessed by people friends who have led us across boundaries and barriers. And admittedly, some of those boundaries keep us safe. When I see a sign that says high voltage, I don't try climbing over it to get close and friendly with a transformer. But some boundaries, as we said in our opening liturgy, don't keep us safe, they just keep us separate. And I think we can thank God for dissolving those boundaries, just as Jesus did when he reached out to the lepers. Because not only were the 10 healed of their affliction and physically better, but now they were welcomed back into the human family, which they could not be prior to that. And what a gift that is. It seems like no matter how well you happen to be, there's no substitute for community. And you can live in the most beautiful place on earth, but you can be cut off from love and respect and community. For example, the island of Molokai. Perhaps one of the most scenic places on earth, soaring mountains and lush palm trees and gorgeous beaches, but all that was scant consolation for the lepers who were imprisoned there for decades. Of course, the converse is also true that even the dingiest place on earth can be full of abundant life when we're surrounded by those we love. Earlier I mentioned that both Thanksgiving and borders are at the core of today's scripture passage. The strange twist to this story is that the one who was most thoroughly outside the border, the Samaritan leper, doubly cursed in a sense, is the one who once healed turns back to make a fuss over Jesus. And he didn't just come back with a thank you note and a Starbucks card either. He fell down at his feet. There's nothing restrained about it. How embarrassing. But then again, think about how much he received. Every week, usually a couple minutes from now, we have our joy jar time. And sometimes when folks are up here, they give thanks for someone or something, and even get a little bit teary. And maybe some of us, when we do that, can feel a little apologetic. Maybe a little too thin-skinned. But truly, in the company of friends, for thanking God for a gift from God, and even if we're feeling the sting of grief or loss, why not show it? Even to the point of tears. What do we saving the tears for? A Bills game? Really?
Not this year.
And when we do express those feelings up here in front of friends, I think we embody that same kind of open, holy love that welcomes every aspect of a person, even tears. The Samaritan's love as he fell at the feet of Jesus, a love that was full on, flat out, unapologetic. And the love of Jesus toward the lepers, a love that was blind and bold and expansive. I think some of the deepest kinds of healing require pushing past borders. Maybe it's a doorway to the office of a therapist. Maybe it's the threshold of a forbidden topic or the edge of a neglected relationship. As I've said before, healing is a social act. It was for Jesus and for the lepers. It is for us. And thank you, Cece, for this one, but as Richard Rohr put it, if we do not transform our pain, we transmit it. If we do not transform our pain, we transmit it. Every act, therefore, of transforming our pain is not just a gift to us or the people we see in the kitchen in the morning. It's a gift to the world. One less piece of pain, one less brick in the wall, one more reason to give thanks. So God bless us all as we dare to push past the borders into a fuller life and love.
for everybody.